In 2024, we ran 100 events and we trained 6,644 educators from more than 1,500 schools.
Wow.
That is amazing.
Hey, welcome into this latest edition of Making the Leap. Glad to have you along. And as we kick off this year, 2025, we always like to check in with one of our great friends inside the Herzog Foundation. She's, I would call it, in terms of what we do here outside of producing shows and content, what we do is so much of the Herzog Foundation focus is the training and the outreach to other schools and helping schools grow and planting new schools. And Sadie Elliott is sort of at the fulcrum of the whole thing.
The lady in the know,
and
I think that's what I call you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm glad to be back.
You have been, ever since the foundation started, you have sort of headed the entire initiative of training and growing Christian schools.
That's right.
Fair to say?
Yes.
And it's grown exponentially. I know last year your goal was 100 trainings.
Yes, we did it. So just a quick snapshot of the timeline here.
Yeah.
2021, we ran 2 events, just 2 donor development events.
2.
Okay. 2022, we ran 16 events and we launched 4 new ones. So those 5 then became what we called our leadership development series. So 16 of 5 types of events in 2022. Okay, 2023, I was pretty proud of myself. We ran 50 events, so that's a pretty good
And you were
jump.
tired. I remember you being like, whew, this is a lot.
And my associate director, Rusty Campbell, wasn't on quite yet. And we launched just 2 teacher trainings that year, our core partnerships with Museum of the Bible and Answers in Genesis. Okay, so then come to spring of 2023, and the board asks, how many are we doing this year? And real proudly I said, 50, that's a lot. That's one a week except for Christmas and Easter, right? Because these are 3-day events. And the question that I got from the board was, can we just double it for next year?
Go big or go home.
Let's just double it.
Home. Sure.
And what a blessing. What a blessing to be asked to double the impact. And that was just the number of events. And so in 2024, we ran 100 events and we trained 6,644 educators from more than 1,500 schools.
Wow.
That is amazing to me.
And we launched 25 new types of events in 1 year as well.
So talk about that for a second. When you say types of events, for people that are outside this building and don't, because I'm looking at the website.
Or missed our conversation last year.
Right, or didn't know,
because we did have kind of an overview conversation about what you do and what the trainings are, so we should probably do it again.
But when you hear training, it's just training, right? So what do you mean by that?
It has exploded. So trainings, our Herzog Foundation Institute, these are kind of synonymous here. There's 3 big buckets that we train in right now. Our leadership development series, our organizational development series, and our teacher development series. So our leadership, like I said, those 5 that we first started, but we've recently added a 6th. So these are the 6 trainings, our leadership series. This is the foundation. If you're a school leader, whether you're head of school or an aspiring head of school, this is where I'd say start here. So these are things like culture building, organizational leadership, board leadership, donor development, marketing, and spiritual formation. Did I mention that one?
You did.
Okay, well, that one's really important.
and these,
and trying to remember
those are 6, right?
Yes,
you got them
6.
all.
Did I?
You did.
I think she did.
And so the thing about it is, if you're running at present a Christian school or you're thinking about it, you've identified these 6 as hallmarks of a solid functioning Christian school, or where maybe Christian schools have struggled? That's right. Is that about right?
That's right. In the early days, we had an advisory team. We said, if we could solve for a few leadership issues, could we see schools be healthier, grow quicker, be more sustainable? And these were the topics that advisory team came up with. So we started there, but that just opened Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Because you get people here, and now you've got, I assume, right? Like, well, this school's got this concern or this need. This school has this area. This one's thriving in this, and now you're pulling all kinds of things, right?
That's right. And just at one quick small example, at our marketing and enrollment training, we spend maybe 30 minutes on tuition. How is tuition presented on your website? How is tuition valuing a sort of value proposition for what you do or not, right? A lot of schools we hear, oh, well, we want to be affordable. And I know the heart behind that, but affordability is anything to anyone, depending on where you're at, right? So we spend 30 minutes on tuition there. Well, we had so much response of, okay, how do I better implement tuition practices? And where should tuition be when I look at the market and all this stuff? So we launched a 3-day purely finance. How do you set tuition? How do you budget? How do you project 3 and 5 years down the road? So that's just one example of how, okay, we started with these 6 leadership, and now how do we go deeper? And that's really where the organizational series took off.
And that should really speak to people, or to parents, really, of all, because tuition is almost the first and foremost thing that parents, when they're on the other end of it and they're looking, they want to know about tuition, right?
Understandably.
And they dismiss or only gravitate based on that one tiny factor. So it's so funny that it starts as small when really that's gigantic. I laugh because people will be like, what's the tuition at your daughter's school? I'm like, oh, well, I know what we pay. I know it's different. And I'll go to find it and I can't. And I understand there are lots of reasons for why, but that's the overarching. That's the place that people start at.
You said that that's the one that people have a heart to say, well, let's make this really affordable. But that's all relative, because if you're going to have quality teachers and organizationally, you
programs,
can't,
all the things that you want,
you can't give it away.
That's right.
You just can't.
That's right. And if I'm new to the area and I'm looking at different schools and I see this private school over here is at 20,000 and this one over here is at 22, and then I look at your private Christian school and you're at 10. Well, if I can afford the 22, or maybe it's a stretch, but I want to consider that. If I look over here at yours and you're at 10, I'm saying, what do you not have?
What do you not,
that
right.
these ones have?
And it's just, right, and that's a wrong way to approach it. I think sometimes, right, as a parent, like to automatically think, well, what isn't happening there that is at that 20,000?
Right. Well, then you take another family that maybe has 3 or 4 kids, 2 working parents, and would struggle at 10 grand and say that's not accessible to me or affordable to me.
So I'm going
to
go.
But it's like, how many kids or how many families at your school pay ticket, right? Pay to sticker price. And so I think it's an unfair kind of perspective for parents to see the sticker price and, not understand fully what tuition assistance available or maybe school choice dollars that they're
It's also scalable when you have I've heard this a lot. Well, if I have 4 kids, I can't afford to put 4 kids. Well, oftentimes it's not as expensive to do 4 as it would be 1. True?
That's true. Yeah, we really encourage schools to go to a purely needs-based tuition assistance program. Yeah. And so when schools use their third-party group and look at all of this, they're going to take those things into consideration.
I should say about Sadie Elliott, too. Here's what's important. The Elliott family, all of them, actually live this stuff.
Right.
So much so, your dad is a part of this organization. I don't know that we've mentioned it before. I think John's been on the show
We've talked
before.
about the board members, and yes, maybe not made the connection that you two are connected.
You came on board, and here's something that's really cool. The Christian school that you attended is the school that our daughter attends today.
Yeah.
And even your grandmother has a hand in what we're living today.
And
this is how committed the Elliott family is.
Yes.
Talk about it.
Yes. So, man, I caught my passion for Christian education from my parents, who helped start Northland Christian High School, which then became the K-12 beast that it is today, of nearly over 500 students.
I think it's over 500 now.
It's just incredible in multiple locations. Yeah. When I was there, we had carpeted gym floors, modulars, and about 100 students total. So we've come a long ways, but just learned so much. And so my parents' journey into Christian education has really exposed that for the rest of my family, which has just been a beautiful journey. And my grandma Nadine, I think to this day, she's still one of even though she's passed, I think she might still be in the top 5 of longest Grandparents' Day attendance, attendees. And on her passing, the family, my dad and his siblings, started the Nadine Elliott Scholarship Fund, and it sends students from Northland this summer, your daughter, to a biblical worldview conference.
And not just her, important. I mean, multiple students were able to apply, and it was an intense little application, I will say.
There was and you would say, oh, well, sure, the Stegall's got it because they know. No, we applied. She did all the work and applied, and it was rigorous.
She came home and showed me, because I think that's important to know, just these things, these scholarships and the tuition conversation. They don't just happen. There has to be work and effort put into it. When she pulled out that little application and I was reading the questions, I was like, well, you have fun with that. We're like, that looks complicated and good for them because they're learning.
Yeah, the trainings that you facilitate all over the country, part of it is finding the Grandma Nadines to help sustain the longevity of a school,
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you look at my family and my dad was board chairman, but then you can't forget about the spouses. I mean, they do a lot of work too, right? So my mom, even though she wasn't on the board, did a lot of work. And there were so many founding families, just as one example, to do that. And so I think, twofold here. One is we train these people. We train, if this training was around when my mom, and dad, and the others were starting this school, how much further could they have gotten faster by maybe getting the advice to say, you know what, I wouldn't do that right out of the gate. I'd do this instead, or whatever that is. But then also at our donor development training and things like that, we train our schools to say, who is in your network that you don't know, but maybe they have just been bit by the bug of Christian education because they've seen the impact of it in their children or grandchildren's lives. We forget about alumni parents. We forget about alumni, right? And so that's a big aspect of engaging people at our donor training, for sure.
Your trainings, when I was looking at the website for this coming year, when I was back kind of checking things out, I noticed more so than really had caught my attention last year. We always talk about we're here in Smithville, Missouri, like little, middle of America, right? But Herzog now, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, we are everywhere. It is everywhere. And can you talk a little bit about what that's going to look like now? Because I saw that where I am used to coming here and seeing people here all the time, training, it is venturing out now in a way that I was not expecting when I looked at that calendar.
That's right. So in addition to just the number of training increase that we saw in 2024, we also saw an increase in demand. So we went from an average of about 50 people attending in 2023 to an average of about 75 people attending in 2024.
Per training.
And this year I've got one coming up that's 120 in Dallas. So we've actually, we do very few here in Smithville just because of capacity anymore.
Right. That's what I was
We've
amazed
launched
by.
HF Nashville. We launched last spring, and we're right downtown. We're a block from the Ryman. It's a really wonderful experience for our school leaders. That facility can hold about 100. So we have 20 events that we do in Nashville, so 20% in Nashville. Then in September, we launched HF DFW and at our site just south of DFW Airport. I used to say that it's in Dallas, and I got my hand slapped by some folks that lived in Fort Worth.
Dallas, Fort Worth.
It was, our facility is in Fort Worth, and it is HF DFW.
But you can get that right, because if somebody says we're near Kansas City, I'm like,
that's
on the Missouri side.
That's right.
Like, let's make sure we got this right.
Exactly. So the HF DFW site has the capacity to go up to 200 per training event. And we're going to do about 25 events there. Okay.
And the deal is, just so people know if they don't, if these trainings sound interesting and you see them online or you hear us talking about them and you think I'd like to go, if you can get there,
that's right.
The rest of it's on the house.
Covered. That's right. Yeah, we like schools to have some buy-in, so we would really encourage schools to be the ones picking up, footing the bill of professional development. We want to see boards and leadership really investing in their people, right? We talked about this. The people are so important. And so we encourage schools to foot the bill of travel, and that's kind of your skin in the game. But then we pick up everything from there. So we're going to cover your hotel room. We're going to cover transportation from the hotel to the training venues. We're going to cover the speaker fees, the workbooks, the food, the beverages, all of it.
And people always say, what's the angle?
That's
what's
right.
the angle? They don't believe it. It sounds too good to be true.
Right.
It's 100%.
Well, it's like when you go to a hotel, right? And you're like, sure, I'll come hear your presentation, but there's a catch.
Exactly. I was going to say, I have a timeshare to offload at the end.
It's not that,
no.
though. It really isn't.
It's not. The catch at the end is like, please keep coming to more or send more from your schools. I have school leaders reach out and they're like, I really want to send 10 teachers to the teacher training this summer because we're off and we can go together. And I have 10 elementary teachers. Can I send them all? And it's like, yes. For us, that's a better investment in your school because more people are taking the learning home. There's some accountability in that. There's
great ways to communicate
impact
when you're all there together versus
when
you've got 3 people coming back to tell
the
whole staff, for sure.
And this is also what's critical to it is the people that lead them as well as the mentors that come out of them. So for people that are coming in green and don't know anything about it, it's not like they have a 3-day training and you send them away never to have any guidance again, right?
That's right.
They make connections.
That's right.
That can guide them along.
That's right. Some really exciting statistics. We just did a third-party review. We wanted to know, okay, we say we're teaching these schools to fish. We say that we're investing in marketing. What's the outcome? And so we had this third-party review, and it showed that over 60% of the guests will, after 12 months, still be in contact with either a coach or like a friend or a peer that they met at one of these trainings. And I think that's really important for a couple of reasons. One, early on when Herzog started, we heard a lot of school leaders say, I just feel like I'm on an island.
Yeah.
Okay. Two, and I think that this kind of comes from that in some ways, the turnover of school leadership is not sustainable, right? So if you're turning over your head of school or executive director every 2.5 years, which is about what we hear is the going tenure right now, you're not building institutional momentum. You're not building trust. You're not cultivating solid board and donor relationships if the face of the organization keeps turning over.
Every 2.5 years?
2.5 is what we're hearing.
And what do you attribute that to? Or what do they attribute that to?
Gosh, I think it's a couple of things. One, typically we see in those situations poor relationship between the board and the head of school. So the board is either way under or way over involved. Where the head of school feels like they don't have support. If they go out on a limb and make a decision, that the board's not going to have their back,
or the flip.
Maybe the board, has best friends or a sister brother on staff, right? Or the flip of you. On paper, on the org chart, you're head of school, but the board's still doing the hiring. The board's still doing, and I think it's so important. I just want to say this. I think it's so important that boards are involved.
Yep.
I mean, you talk about institutional continuity and missional alignment, making sure we don't have mission drift from our founding core values. It is so important to have an involved board.
It's like three branches of government, isn't it? I mean, they all have to keep one another honest.
That's right.
I mean, each has to operate autonomously and have their own authority, but work together. That's a weird thing. So these are the things you can get training on.
Yes.
Well, and it's important to note that when we talk about a board of directors, or however, whatever the phrasing is, because I know they can all be different. But when my initial, like 4 years ago, I was very, I'll use the word upset with the board of where our kids were all in school together, right? Whereas
the public school district board, yeah.
And I look now, I just think I don't want there to be that antagonistic feeling. It's not just the board and the head of school, it's the board and the parents, and how there's communication, and how you continue to kind of have that the partnership, but yet you still have a flow. You still have a chain of command type thing. So I walked in to our current school and I was like, no, I'm not going to a board meeting. But yet I thought, well, I mean, I have been. I've been to, I think, one. I've only been to one. But I read the minutes. I pay attention.
Yes.
I talk to people that are on the board, and I make sure I do talk to people and say that are new, like, you do need to
And I think that
continue
this
to be
is an
invested.
important point, especially if you've come from the public school system, because in your public school, that is a representative board. That is an elected
different.
board.
Yes.
They should be accountable to the parents, to the voters in that community. And I think that's we're seeing a lot that aren't, right? A lot that are surprised
Hence
by
the
what
problem.
books their kids are reading at early
in my
ages
library.
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you're at a private institution, this private nonprofit, that board is representative of the institution alone.
Right.
Right.
We're not pulling from the
That's
neighboring
right.
community. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that board is responsible for the missional alignment of the organization. And when there are, concerns, or when there is gossip or drama, not that we ever have that in Christian schools, we have to understand that ultimately the board is the leadership of that school, right? And so I do think it's important that Christian school boards have representation of parents, but when you're sitting on that board, you are representing the institution, not your second grade child who doesn't like his reading curriculum.
Right.
So we have
It's
covered in
different.
this conversation alone, too, I would guess, I don't know this for a fact, but here's my guess. Tuition, money, and administration. Are those the two biggest of the trainings you offer in terms of interest and dialogue around, or maybe if you want, consternation or struggle?
Yes.
Those are the two?
Yes. So I would say our finance training called strategic stewardship, our board leadership training, our donor development training, these are the ones that we get most interest in. And if I talk to a school, so yesterday I had a call with the school leader who's not been to one of our events, I say, what problems are you facing? What do you think's the biggest challenge? More often than not, they're going to say money's the challenge, and more often than not, I'm going to say it's probably a leadership thing. We're not building trust. We're not building relationships. We're not clear about who we are, our vision, whatever that might be. And so we kind of work these two in tandem. And what we often see as school leaders, then they'll come to donor, but then donor development, but then they'll realize, oh, you know what? Maybe we've broken trust at a leadership level with donors, which is why we see a low retention rate. So how can I utilize my board, utilize my position as head of school to maybe rebuild some of those? Like, how do we be really intentional? But then there's a whole host of other trainings that we haven't even mentioned, scratch the surface of.
Right.
So one of the things I'm really excited about is last year we started a special education training, and I'm excited for this for multiple reasons. First and foremost, I just think it's really important that Christian schools be intentional to individualize learning and honor the fact that just God has created different kids to learn differently, right? So I think from a theological lens, I'm really excited for that one. The other lens is school choice. And so in states where we're seeing a lot of opposition to school choice, they will say, oh, well, you can't take kids who learn differently. You can't take kids with special needs. Right. You know what I say to that? Christian schools can be more proactive because they don't have to wait for the diagnosis. They don't have the hoops to jump through that the public system does. Right. And so we train schools, not that, if you're a small school, you have to start a whole sped program or whatever, but like, how do we fit that into our current practices in the classroom? How do we strategically work with aides? Or a lot of it comes down to reading specialists in the early years, right? And so that training's really exciting. The other one that's less exciting but really important, of course, and especially in light of Nashville last year and Wisconsin more recently, is our crisis management training.
So in that security crisis.
It is all-encompassing of physical campus safety and security. How do we train our teachers to identify students at risk? Whether that, and because I think a lot of times we focus on the school shooter, right? That's what's in the news. That's what we're all scared of. But suicide's a lot more likely, or a student that comes in.
That student at risk phrasing is huge.
We talked about this when that subject happened. When the Wisconsin shooting happened, I said, and to be frank, I've not investigated it further, but it was very difficult for me to believe that a well-trained school, teachers, staffs, administrators, could miss someone that trouble.
Right, like that they weren't aware.
In a Christian school.
Yeah.
But then I realized, well, then maybe there are a lot of Christian schools who could use that training. They don't either know how to spot it or I don't know.
Or what to do when you
see it,
right? Because you're a teacher and teachers are front lines, right? And so your teacher, maybe take it to an administrator, but the administrator's like, well, but their parents are working with us, right? And it's like, we've got to really be intentional there as Christian schools. And then that leads me to the other topics covered in crisis management, our policies. What do we have in writing that's a hard and fast policy? What should we not have in writing? Because as Christian schools, we want to consider intent when something goes wrong, right? And so that's right. And so if you put something in policy, you have to follow it, right? And so there's a lot that needs to be in policy, and it needs to be entrenched in Scripture. And there's all these practices to make sure as a religious institution,
the legalism piece of things, right? So you have that balance.
That's right. And then the fourth kind of major component on this training is communications, right? What do you do when crisis happens? What do you say? What do you not say? Whether you take the interview, whether you don't. And I think a lot of schools are wholly unprepared, but also can get themselves into trouble on the communication side when you say something.
The wording and how you phrase and how you do.
Because of the theology of Christian school, they're now speaking on behalf of the faith in a crisis? Is that what you mean? Is that what they get in trouble about, or something else?
Yes, I think we need to be really careful to use. I mean, in a Christian school, we know that crisis is going to hit. whether it's a student, whether it's a lawsuit, whether it's a teacher, crisis is going to come. So leaders have to be prepared from a communications perspective as a Christian school leader to point that back to the gospel, right? But at the same time, whatever you say publicly, especially if it's a legal or could be a legal issue, whether it's publicly, whether it's in writing via email. I mean, I just think that we don't understand what disclosure can encompass in a legal issue. And, you know, we've been in talks recently with both First Liberty Institute and Alliance Defending Freedom.
Okay.
Both have incredible resources for Christian schools. Would encourage any school leader to check them out. But it's, you know, if your school has to decide whether or not to forfeit a girls' high school basketball game because the other team has someone that identifies as a woman but is in fact a biological man, or I should just say man, I guess. What are you going to do? And whatever you say in writing via email with your AD and with the sports league and with your parents, if there's a lawsuit, and there's a couple of these happening across our country right now, anything you say in writing, in public, speaking, social media, you know, you're on the record for.
Just because you are a Christian school unaffiliated with a public school system doesn't mean you're free from being sued and targeted by an overzealous attorney.
Absolutely. So one of our coaches at Crisis Management, and this is one kind of just caveat that I'd say here, is our coaches are incredible. So every training we have current practicing practitioners. So a current head of school, a current principal, a current donor development director, and we have our consultants, right? So that could be within Christian education, but it could be outside of Christian education. This was when I felt like it was really important to bring in an external point of view, is on communications. And so we partner with a group called Pinkston out of DC, and they handle communications, strategic, and crisis for a lot of really big name companies. And I'm actually working with them to develop a whole online library of like templates for crisis communication, do's and don'ts for crisis communication. So that's, I think, important to know.
That's huge, especially in the world that we live in of social media, how fast something can get picked up and shared. My so-and-so sent me a text. Well, maybe that person is sitting in a position of leadership at a school, and now all of a sudden that's gone out. I think that is an amazing need being met with these trainings from Herzog. I think that's a big deal.
You also, specifically for teachers, I know we've talked about administrators and boards, but there are trainings specifically for educators if they'd like to come.
That's right.
Talk about that.
Yes, I would love to. So most of our teacher trainings right now we host at the Museum of the Bible, and I'll talk about those. But we also have our Answers in Genesis in Northern Kentucky, which is just an incredible experience for teachers. And then whatever we're doing at Museum of the Bible, I'm trying to replicate on the West Coast to make it a little bit more accessible for schools in the Pacific Northwest or California or on that side of this beautiful country. And so we'll likely be running some events in Santa Barbara and in Seattle as our kind of West Coast base. So our teacher trainings, we have 4 that are specific to the Museum of the Bible, where it's come, enjoy the museum, enjoy DC, and we run 4 a year. 2 of those are focused on biblical literacy and the history of Scripture. 2 of those are focused on the impact of Scripture throughout Western civilization and particularly American history. So super cool experiences. You tour the Capitol, you tour DC, you tour the Museum of the Bible, you get to talk with scholars. And then similarly, our Answers in Genesis is you go tour the Ark and the Creation Museum, and you get to engage with AIG scholars. So all of those 6 is what I would truly call teacher retreats. Come, enjoy, fill your cup. We're not talking classroom management. We're not talking discipline practices, which is oftentimes what teachers want, is the really practical stuff. But all of our teacher trainings are eligible for CEUs. So I know a lot of teachers are concerned about can this count towards
what is that?
Continuing education.
Continuing education.
Yeah. So if I'm a certified teacher or if my school's accredited by certain groups, I need to have
like a certain amount of hours to keep it valid. To keep yours. These are the things that I no longer have to worry about, but I know about.
How many of these teachers are public school teachers who have decided they want to join a Christian school versus I came out of school and I went right into Christian education?
Well, that's a great question. I'd have to pull specific numbers on it. My
half and
immediate reaction would say probably 60-70% out of the public school.
Oh.
Because what you talk about, if I were to go back in full time, I would have myself there immediately just to bulk up everything, because I don't have, that's not what I had in college.
This is really
right,
important.
as
So you're
teacher.
saying most of your trainings for teachers are from the public school who've decided to get into Christian education.
Yes. I mean, they're open to anyone,
Or
right?
at least 2/3. Like,
But
half to
that's what we're
2/3.
seeing. And we're actually seeing a lot of schools use our trainings as a part of the onboarding process into what is Christian education.
Yes.
Huge.
And what does it mean
Right.
to teach in this
Right.
biblical narrative?
Right.
And how do I relate math to,
Yes.
to
How
the,
do I, biblical
Yes.
worldview, where does that come from?
Exactly.
Yes,
So another one of our teacher trainings that I definitely want to mention, well, two, I guess I should say. I could talk about these all day. But so we have a summit called the Great Book Summit, which talks about how do we reincorporate the great conversation into the classroom, right? We've swung the pendulum so far into the curriculum side that now kids are reading textbooks, and to some extent, of course, that's a great help for teachers, but they need to be reading primary source texts. They need to be reading these great novels and stories.
Which is interesting, because that was what was happening on my way out of education. And that's also where I was a communication arts teacher, and the push to include the nonfiction, the short, that kind of thing. And I was like, but I like my
get away
books.
from the Huckleberry
Get away
Finns
from
and that
the
kind of thing?
classics.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
like you said, text, like
Yeah.
reading big, important, classical
Right.
in some ways, or just
or
solid.
reading an entire book.
Right.
That's kind of a lost art,
And,
right?
and you
Yeah.
you even didn't really do it at that point.
That's
you
wild.
read in chunks.
Yeah.
You never sent the book home
Yes.
because it wasn't going to get read.
Yes.
Like, there were all kinds of issues, and I was like, yeah, that's
Yes.
another column in the
Yeah.
let's
So
go.
Well,
how
and
to
it-
bring that back? That's
yeah,
what you're training,
exactly.
right?
And a lot of Christian schools are like, oh, well, great books are like a classical thing.
Right.
That's kind of a hoity-toity
Right.
thing or whatever. I love my classical schools, so shout out to them. But this truly is not. It's taking a classically liberal approach to education that says education at its core is really, truly is about character formation and forming civic virtue. And how are we going to do that if we're not reading great texts, if we're not learning history like we should,
And not just reading the
understanding
newest and best book that
context,
just
and
came out.
That's right. Yeah. So I think it's hugely important for any teacher, whatever type of school or homeschool you lead, to re-engage. And so that's just a 1.5-day event. Most of our teacher trainings are a little bit shorter. But the other one that we've launched, and this is our biggest one that I'm probably like, if you don't know which one to send your teachers to, I would really encourage this one first. We call it Teacher Apologetics.
I just saw that on the. I was
Yes.
like, what?
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we think about apologetics with our high school students, right? We if you want to evangelize to a different religion, we're going to understand what the religion is, understand the history of the religion, understand the language that religion uses, and then we're going to talk in our apologetic classes about how to best reach them with the gospel. So I took this concept of apologetics. I loved my apologetics class in high school with Dr. Callan. And I'm like, you know what? So much has changed with this generation of students.
Big issues.
So much has
Right.
changed. Big issues, technology,
Yes.
like access to information, all sorts of things. And so I said, what if we did an apologetics course for teachers, right? And so if teachers are trying to evangelize to students, why do the students think that the way they do? What is the language the students use?
Right.
Why do they really struggle on these particularly hard cultural topics, right? And so it's a great training. And what we did this year is you can send your whole teacher staff. Night one, everybody's together, and it's an introductory of like, let's refocus what we believe Christian education to be. And then the next 1.5 days is elementary is over here talking about how to build a really solid foundation of scripture, biblical truths, etc. And over here, our high school teachers and secondary teachers, and we are talking about gender confusion, standpoint epistemology, abortion, critical theory,
Pornography,
yes,
all those
we are
things,
talking about the
yes.
big issues with the heart of like, let's understand where our students are coming from? And I think that's really hard for a lot of adults today. I'll speak for myself here to say, like, why are you struggling with that? You
that's
know,
hard,
like,
right. That's a black and white. What are we doing?
Yeah. And so it all goes, all of our teacher trainings really go back to this idea that, you know, you could have the best classroom schedule, the best curriculum, the best classroom management practices. But if you as a teacher are not growing in your own spiritual maturity, you're going to fail to reach your students in the margins.
Well,
and
it's the proverbial set in your ways type concept, right? It worked 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Of course it's going to work now, and that's not always the case.
And I think the margins are so important with Christian education, of being able to say, yes, of course, by the end of this, you're going to get into the college you want to get into or take the career path you want to take. But the importance is when that student asks a really tough theological question, or when that girl's going through a breakup, or when the basketball team just lost state championships, like those are the moments that we're pointing them back to the gospel. And I think as teachers, we just have to be really intentional that we ourselves are modeling to our students a life of faith, a life of joy. Like, how many people in Christian education are just kind of disgruntled? It's like, I don't want more people like that. I don't want our students to be disgruntled about the faith. Like, if you are growing in your faith, there should be evidence of that, and that's what our students should see. And so that's kind of the heart that our teacher trainings take, is if you want classroom management training or curriculum training or whatever, we'll do that virtually, take it or leave it. But what we care about is the heart of the teacher.
It's a culture thing, and people should know that if this sounds interesting, don't mess around, because these fill up. They used to not, but now they do. And you don't just take everybody, right?
That's right. Yes. And this is a great point. So if you watched the previous podcast last year, we've changed a couple things.
Okay.
The biggest change is that it is now not a registration. It's not just first come, first serve. It is an application process. So you are applying because this is Herzog's investment in you. It's like a grant, right? No money is exchanged, but we are covering the cost. It's around $1,200 per seat per training that Herzog picks up. And so we ask you for an application. If you're coming to a finance training, we want to know where you're at. Like, no shame if you feel like you're behind the ball on finance, budgeting, saving, whatever that might be. Let us know where you're at. Take it seriously. You know, we will reject your application if you give us a one-word or one-sentence answer, and we'll say, try again if you want to try again. But we are taking this investment seriously, so we need to see that from you. So across the board, it's an application process now. We really encourage schools to bring at least 2 people, ideally more, to any training they're sending them to. There's safety in numbers. There's goodness in community. And that it helps us be able to be more intentional with that school while we're on board. So those are a couple of big changes just to flag for people. But if you want to come to any event, you can apply for any event. If you're a board member and you're curious about the teacher trainings because you just want to know more about Christian education, great, come.
Do it.
You know, if you're a teacher who might want to take a principal role in the next couple of years, come to the administration trainings. Like, let us help build that and develop that in you. So,
and all of that information is online if people want to find the schedule and the application.
That's right. It is all online.
Get ready to spend some time, because I think it was 2 weeks. Well, after I talked to you about doing this, I went on. So I know, and I just a lot of scroll. It was a lot. It's like it's a lot of information. So I actually would say thoughtfully spend the time looking, not just a cursory overview, and that doesn't look interesting. Like, really dive in, because there's a lot there.
And you know, if certain dates or locations don't work, we run every event year round, multiple times, and then each year. So, you know, make it work for you. And then I have some schools with a PD budget that affords them a flight somewhere. And so these school leaders will say, well, I live a short flight from Nashville, so I could go to the Nashville site, but I would really love to try the training out at the Reagan Library in Southern California. It's like, let us help create those experiences for school leaders who are taking, you know, a financial hit to be in Christian education and just doing it for the love of students and love of the Lord. So.
And as always, it would be an error of us to not include that if you're just thinking about this for the very first time and you don't have an established school, we have an entire program, which I know you're not here to speak about, but School Box is something that if it's on your heart to begin one, That's a great place to start.
That's right. And as you actually go through Schoolbox, we've started partnering with Schoolbox to say, okay, the startups that are taking it seriously and that we're seeing progress here, we're actually going to help cover the cost to get to many of our trainings.
Oh,
Great.
that's awesome.
So if you're interested in that whole process, hfschoolbox.com is your best place to start. And as you go through the process, we'll help make these trainings even more accessible.
Every
fantastic.
bit of this is online at herzogfoundation.com, and you can read all about this and get the trainings. When do you take off? I mean, now that we're here in the first of the year, 2025, you anticipate you're doing how many this year?
Another 100.
Another 100.
At least.
Yeah.
We'll see. I like to overperform.
They didn't tell you to double it yet. They didn't say jump to 2 and be good.
And if people have any questions, can they reach out?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yep. All of our information's online. We're happy to answer questions. We get a lot of like, which ones should I take first? And the answer is, let me know a little bit more about your school and I'll help you figure out which one to.
Well, and I
come
also
to
noticed
first.
in some of them, if it, it even says right on there, if you're not sure, yes, you can reach out, but if you're not sure, we do recommend going to this, like the Bible literacy or biblical literacy
right.
versus this one. And I thought that's awesome too, because it just kind of takes some of that guesswork. Like, what am I getting into? And to have those already recommendations out there, I think is helpful.
This is the nucleus of what we do here at the Herzog Foundation. Sadie Elliott makes so much of it go, and we have a great team of support, I know, with you that travel around and make all these. We see from time to time teachers come through here. It's cool. Many of these become Teachers of the Year at our annual event in Washington, D.C.
Well, and watching the
nice.
social media, because I do, all of a sudden I'll be like, well, look at them sitting out there in
that's a new
Florida.
one.
Look at them.
Recruitment and retention, Florida, all these
No,
things.
you guys,
What's happening
you move
there?
fast, and we watch social media and don't even know where you are half the time until we see it pop up on. So anyway, thank you for spending time with us again, Sadie.
It was a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for your support. And we're here to serve schools. So however we can do that, I would just say, if you're a school leader watching this, reach out, let us know.
HerzogFoundation.com, and until next week, we will see you on Making the Leap. Thanks for watching and listening.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.